Hello from ABA Annual Meeting 2017 in New York City. I'm Lawrence Galletti.
I'm Reid Trautz.
And I'm Meg McCarthy.
And I'm Greg Siskind.
And we're on the road with Legal Talk Network. And we're back. Thank you so much for joining our continuing coverage of the ABA annual meeting here in New York City, the Big Apple, Midtown Manhattan at the Hilton. I have a very special lineup here today. We kind of set up a special arrangement through the modern technology that we have here. I have a guest from Memphis, Tennessee, Mr. Greg Siskind. Welcome to the show.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
And then I have two guests with me here in New York City at the Hilton. I have Mr. Reid Trautz. Hello.
Nice to see you again, Lawrence.
And I have a new face we just met at this conference, Meg. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome.
So as a podcast host, we don't often give away the microphone, but I was listening to everybody's setup in pregame, and I realized that I don't know enough about this area of law to be of value. So I'm going to hand the hosting mic over to Mr. Reid Trautz. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, Lawrence. Appreciate it. You know, we did this in Miami at the mid-year and wanted to give the audience an update really on what's going on in immigration, because as lawyers we know that since the beginning of the Trump administration, immigration has been a priority. There's been lots of information out there in the news, but maybe not a lot of information that lawyers really, might want to know so that they have a better understanding of really what's going on in immigration law and policy. And in fact, what we'll talk about today is how they might get involved, even if they're not an immigration lawyer, with some of the issues, because they do go to the root of our society and our economy here today. So I'm very pleased to have Greg and Mary Meg join and be able to talk about those. So I want to ask you, and Greg, I'll go to you first. So what's the biggest issue of all the ones, the executive orders and the congressional acts that have been introduced? What in your mind is really the big issues that are facing both the Congress but also the American public today because of these immigration proposals?
Well, I think one of the challenges is that it's coming at us from a variety of fronts. There's not one single immigration issue. There's a lot of them that are coming in. During the campaign, President Trump's campaign website had a list of 10 big ideas for things that they wanted to pursue in immigration, and that's sort of been a checklist for me as we've been hearing about different policies and different actions and different executive orders as far as what his priorities are. And it's been he's hit quite a few of them. There's a few that he hasn't, but for the most part, he has. And it really, I think it depends on what area of immigration law you're in as far as where it's impacting you. He had a number of proposals that deal with undocumented immigrants, and some of them were well known in the campaign, like the wall, and but some of them were maybe less known. If you are a removal lawyer, certainly we've seen an increase in deportation activity. If you are a lawyer that deals with business immigration issues, you've probably had clients that have been affected by the Muslim ban. You've been, if you deal with skilled workers, you're dealing with the repercussions of the Buy American, Hire American executive action. If you deal with startup companies, there was a big regulation that was supposed to take effect a couple weeks ago called entrepreneur parole, which was pulled at the last minute. So it really depends on the kind of practice you have. And I think if you talk to different immigration lawyers, they're going to tell you this is hitting my practice the most or that's hitting my practice the most.
But from your perspective, and I know you represent clients in a wide variety of settings, but in terms of how it's impacting or could impact the U.S. and the economy and sort of our culture, what would you say is the one or two biggest issues out there?
Well, I think the biggest change and the one that probably concerns me the most is something that's different from this presidency versus probably any in the 27 years that I've been practicing immigration law, is the attack on legal immigration. We've certainly seen crackdowns on undocumented immigrants in the past and changes in different administrations there. But for the most part, except maybe 20 years ago during the Clinton administration for a brief period of time, for the most part, presidents tend to be very pro-legal immigration, pro-skilled worker immigration. Most presidents have been pro-trade, and we're really, I think, seeing a change at that level, and probably the RAISE Act that was introduced, I guess the week before last, is the latest example of an attack on skilled worker immigration, which I think, in the long run, probably poses the most dangerous for the U.S. economy, because companies are not going to be starting. We're not going to be attracting the best and the brightest. Companies that rely on skilled workers are going to start looking overseas and putting their operations. And I just see a lot of danger signals if that takes hold.
Yeah, and one of those in that RAISE Act is to change the way immigrants can come into the United States and basically eliminate most family-based immigration, but also change the business immigration to a point system where you get so many points for different characteristics about you, your education, your background, your language skills. And I think you've seen this by this article by Bill Stock, and it was on the Fox News website, where he looked at some of his past clients who have been those entrepreneurs and been those job generators here in the United States. And he went back and looked and said, if they were to come in under this proposed new point system, they wouldn't get in today. And these are people who have extraordinary capabilities that are needed by companies here in the United States. So I get what you're saying is that there are fundamental changes that are being proposed here that are going to affect all parts. Mary Meg, let me bring you in for a minute, because you're in a slightly different part of immigration practice, but you deal a lot of times with people who are in your role in dealing with asylum and other types of entry into the States. Can you give us a little background and then tell us what you think are really the impactful areas today to be concerned about?
Thank you very much, Reid. I'm the director of the National Immigrant Justice Center, as well as the co-chair of the ABA Commission on Immigration. And I think one of the areas of great concern to us right now is the treatment of refugees or asylum seekers, as well as immigrants in our communities. We've seen the various executive orders related to immigration that attack refugees, and that's currently in the courts, and we'll see what the Supreme Court does in the near future. But that clearly is impacting refugees who have been vetted extensively and now been barred from coming in the country, but also impacts refugees who are here who are trying to bring family members over to be reunited. I think the other area that does not get as much attention but is clearly concerning is the executive order regarding the interior enforcement. And in that, we have seen that prosecutorial discretion, which was exercised throughout the past administrations, is no longer viable. It's been eliminated. So every immigrant is a target, even certain individuals with green cards and who are lawful permanent residents.
So the executive order you're talking about, there used to be sort of ground rules as to where people were, immigrants were picked up, and if they were within so many miles of the border and so many days, that would determine sort of what process applied to them. And now it's really become indiscriminate. There is no real priority anymore. So people who have no criminal backgrounds, who've been here a long time, yes, they've not been here legally, but they've also been led a good life and done everything right. And they're being picked up and deported from the United States, whether they have a family here, whether they have a home here, whether they have a job here, they're being sent back.
Correct. Looking at statistics from the same time last year, we've seen a nearly 40% increase in arrests of immigrants. And we've also seen a dramatic increase in the number of individuals who are placed in the immigration court proceedings, which is then resulting in increasing the backlog in the immigration court system. So immigrants are living in fear and anxiety. Many of them now are being detained in remote facilities without access to counsel.
And let's talk about that for a minute. I don't think a lot of people know that we detain, essentially jail, thousands of immigrants, thousands of people who've lived here while they're waiting for that process to happen at a significant cost to the American taxpayer, but also not necessarily with the same level of due process. And I know you've been involved in that. Can you explain that to our audience in terms of what's been happening?
Right. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, in the past administration, we saw about 34,000 individuals a day held in immigration custody. Currently, that has increased to 41,000 individuals a day. And the Trump administration is now asking for funding to detain 51,000 people a day. At the same time, you have to realize that we're seeing a decrease in the people who are crossing the border. So who's being detained? These are individuals who have strong family ties, relationships here. In fact, I think it's 60% of the undocumented population have been here for more than a decade. So what we're seeing is an increase of individuals who are hard-working members of our community being detained in county jails and private prisons without access to counsel many times, because immigrants, unlike other individuals who are placed in the criminal justice system, don't have a right to appointed counsel. And that's one of the resolutions that we're presenting this week to the American Bar Association House of Delegates, asking that there be government-funded attorneys for individuals who are held in detention.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the women and children from Central America. Again, that flow has slowed down greatly. But for people to understand sort of what's been happening there, that these aren't people who are crossing the border illegally. They're presenting themselves for asylum, but there's been some games being played and some rights being violated. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Right. They have a legal right to cross into this country to seek protection under our U.S. refugee law, asylum law, as well as under international law. And what we're doing is we are arresting and detaining these mothers and children. And what historically was the case is after they pass initial screening, they'd be released and they would be able to be in the communities, the children would be with families, and the mothers would be able to care for their children outside of a jail setting. Now we're seeing that this administration is not releasing them, and they're raising their children in a jail, in a prison, not because they've committed any type of crime or anything, but rather they're seeking asylum. So it's a clear violation of international law, as well as our own humanitarian law. If we treat individuals like this in this country, what does that say about our values and what we believe and hold true?
And Greg, I want to bring you back in on that note. I mean, really what we do with our immigration law and policy, how we treat immigrants, is really a reflection of our American culture and society. And you agree with that, but you also see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, overwhelmingly the political polls that are out there seem to support a pro-immigration policy. So I think some of the pundits out there are saying that this reflects some change in thinking with the American populace. It's not reflected in the polls. I was only going to add to what Mary Meg was talking about is that, with these executive actions, there's a couple of things that haven't really happened yet that I think there's some concern that the problems that she was talking about are going to get much worse. One is is expedited removal, which right now, if we were talking about detention, you're talking about courts being backlogged, but what the administration is talking about is the possibility of a large number of people that are here without documents being removed if they can't prove that they've been here for at least 2 years without any access to the courts. And I think a lot of lawyers were assuming that if the courts are backlogged for 4 and 5 years, that at least people would still have the opportunity to make their case. But I think what concerns a lot of us is that people are just going to be removed without ever having their day in court. And Mary Meg also talked about refugee processing, the refugee numbers. And I think that one thing that concerns me as well is we've mentioned the RAISE Act. The point system and cutting most of the family categories have gotten all the headlines, but the RAISE Act actually caps refugee numbers at 50,000 and ties the hands of future presidents. If one president wants to cut the numbers back, that's their right to do so. But if the RAISE Act passed, it would basically require an act of Congress to raise those numbers up again. So there's a lot that the president the president hasn't done yet that we're worried that is coming. I think the only thing positive that we've seen probably is the continuation of the DACA program, but even that right now is in danger if litigation in Texas proceeds along the same way that the DAPA program did from 2 years ago.
Right, and those are the programs that affect the, what are called dreamers, right? The kids who were brought here by their parents when they were very young as children, but they're not here as legal citizens.
Yeah, so I mean, that's that one little positive that we've seen so far. I think is hanging by a thread.
So we've got a lot of lawyers out there that are looking at these things and saying, what can I do to get involved? They might not have an immigration law background, but they may have certainly other legal skills. To both of you, what would you say to lawyers who want to get involved and try to help with these issues? Because there is litigation going on, but there may be new litigation coming too that they could be a part of.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for lawyers from looking at some of the constitutional issues we've seen, threats to cities and local municipalities and counties if they pass a sanctuary city or welcoming city ordinance. And there are some Fourth Amendment issues related to forcing local authorities to collaborate or cooperate with the federal immigration enforcement operations. I also think there's a lot going on now in the area of family law because immigrants are afraid that if they are deported, there may be issues relating to their children who are U.S. citizens, as well as probate and estates, what happens to their financial assets in their homes. But I would argue also that there's still a lot of opportunities for attorneys to be trained by organizations to represent pro bono non-citizens who are in removal proceedings. We've continue to see a large percent of unaccompanied immigrant children appearing alone in courtrooms. The need is great, and legal aid organizations are not able to fulfill that need alone.
And one fact to add is that the court statistics show when a person, a child, an adult, is represented by an attorney and has had that opportunity, their chance of success is far greater than if they've never talked to an attorney before. So that's why it's important, and there just isn't a capacity right now to provide lawyers for all those folks. But if we had more lawyers who were not trained and could get trained, and that's why there are a number of ways to get involved through different organizations.
Absolutely. And I do think there's also opportunities for people to express their opinions and to support and stand with immigrants. We're not in danger of being deported, and this is an opportunity for us. And I know Senator Graham and Senator Durbin have introduced the DREAM Act. It's important to tell your Congress people that you support positive legislation.
So I'll just give a quick plug to the Immigrant Justice Campaign that's coming together by the American Immigration Lawyers Association, by the American Immigration Council. Lawyers can get information, and I know that there's efforts there to provide training in immigration law, mentoring, and to try to reach some of these people who need lawyers in the detention centers through existing programs. But we're trying to increase that capacity. And Greg, finally to you, in terms of where would you recommend that listeners go to get good information about what's really happening with the law and policy and regulations in this country? Where do you look for your information to help you understand all these things that are going on?
Well, I'm always I'm ready to plug the American Immigration Lawyers Association website, which has tremendous information both for its members and for the broader public, and that's a good place to go. The ABA has resources on its site as well, especially regarding pro bono projects. So those are two places to go. There's a lot of great organizations like American Immigration Council and Northwest Immigration Rights Project and ACLU, and a lot of them that have really strong immigration sections on their websites that are talking about litigation activities. So they're out there. I only wanted to add, I think, as well, to what you were talking about before regarding pro bono activities, that, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the ABA have been facilitating at the local level pro bono efforts. In Memphis, my community has been one example of that, where the ABA has provided grant funding to our local bar association to assist with unaccompanied minors that are showing up in our immigration court. AILA, our local immigration chapter, has been providing mentoring to non-immigration lawyers in our area. And so one of the things I would probably say would be to look to AILA and find out with their local chapters if they're leading any efforts for trainings in asylum and representing unaccompanied minors and other categories where there just simply aren't enough immigration lawyers to be able to represent that clientele, and where there are these pro bono opportunities that are available.
I would just add to that, Greg, I think that's a really good point, is for people to get involved with their local communities and local organizations, including AILA, but to make those connections, because there's so much to be done in this arena right now. And I think even at the state and local level, to let your city officials, the school boards, the more we engage the communities at the home level, I think we're going to have a real impact, because it's going to be challenging at the federal level.
And the more we do this, not just on immigration law, but on constitutional issues and what the law is, what really is a sanctuary city, what are we really talking about, and not just listening to the headlines, but as lawyers digging a little bit deeper and getting to the facts and the law, I think would be really helpful to move us all forward in this.
All right. Well, that was a terrific job hosting there, Reid. I really appreciate it. Terrific show, everybody. Wonderful contributions. Want to thank Greg Siskind for joining us here from Memphis, Tennessee. Want to thank Meg McCarthy for joining us here in New York, with Reid Trautz also here in New York. And just had one last question for you guys. I know we're dropping some information for different organizations to call and get involved with, but if our listeners wanted to follow up with you personally, would you mind leaving some contact information for them? Let's start with Reid.
Sure. The easiest way is email address, PPC, that stands for Practice and Professionalism Center, ppc@aila.org, and that'll get to me.
All right, Mary Meg.
Yes, the easiest way is by email address, which is mmccarthy@heartlandalliance.org.
How about you, Greg?
Easiest is email for me as well, at G for Greg, Siskind, Siskind, at visalaw.com.
Well, we've reached the end of the road for this episode, but I want to thank our guests for joining us and our listeners for tuning in. And if you like what you heard today, please rate us in Apple Podcasts. We'll see you next time for another episode of On the Road with Legal Talk Network.
If you'd like more information about what you've heard today, please visit LegalTalkNetwork.com. Subscribe via iTunes and RSS. Find us on Twitter and Facebook, or download our free Legal Talk Network app in Google Play and iTunes. The views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by, Legal Talk Network, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer.